It is a pleasure for me to participate in this series of videos on data safety and monitoring boards. My discussion today will focus on the role of the chair of the Data Safety and Monitoring Board, and I will try and elucidate some of the lessons that I've learned over the years in participating in these studies. I want to begin with what the structure of a meeting should look like. The meeting structure has evolved over the last really 30 or 40 years with the work of Drs. Demetz, Ellenberg, and Fleming, and maybe even originated from the original HIV data safety and monitoring boards that began in the late 1980s. But it's very important to adhere to this structure. Most importantly, there is initial closed session of just the members of the Data Safety and Monitoring Board. This provides them with a 10 or 15-minute period of time to discuss potential issues that they want to further explore during the open session. Now, the open session is when there is an update of the protocol, and that can be presented by the company, and if not the company, the sponsor, whomever that may be, or even the government, if the government is responsible for the clinical trial. Usually these open sessions last approximately an hour. Then there are two closed sessions. The first closed session begins with that of an unblinded statistician who will compare treatment interventions or device interventions to determine whether or not there are differences in either safety or efficacy, which the Data Safety and Monitoring Board should be aware of. More recently, we've gone to a new model in some of the data safety and monitoring boards that I've been involved in that include an unblinded statistician and an unblinded clinician as well. The unblinded clinician's role is to provide a medical interpretation of the data presented by the unblinded statistician. The second closed session is that of the Data Safety and Monitoring Board only. And it is during this period of time, and it can last as long as an hour, depending upon the needs of the protocol and the needs of the study participants, to forge recommendations which can then be presented to the leadership with recommendations regarding continuing or discontinuing the study. That becomes very important in terms of informing local institutional review boards. Subsequently, minutes are generated, and I'll come back to that. So, what is the role of the chair? The chair has to provide overall leadership for the Data Safety and Monitoring Board, ergo direction and guidance to committee members. And each committee member may have differences of opinion or ideas that may, of necessity, be brought to the table. The role of the chair of a monitoring committee, as opposed to a data safety and monitoring committee, can be different, as it's usually under the control of a sponsor that is industry. Industry sometimes generates an agenda that's very different than the one that I showed you a minute ago. The chair has to guarantee the charter with the sponsor and ensure that it is acceptable. Now, there may be multiple versions, and I'll give you an example of that. For example, if the unblinded statistician changes, we have to have an updated charter that includes the name of that new unblinded statistician. The chair is usually a physician with DSMB experience and familiar with the disease if possible. You know, when we began with data safety and monitoring boards for COVID-19, no one knew much about the disease. So examples would be SARS-CoV-2 resulting in COVID-19 disease, or even HIV. And the data safety and monitoring chair should have experience in clinical trials in general, be it vaccines, therapeutics, diagnostics, et cetera. And that is really selected by the sponsor of the study. Okay, what about the composition of the committee? And this is exceedingly important. As I alluded to, you need to have clinicians familiar with the disease. You also need to have ethicists who can intervene on behalf of the volunteers who participate in the study to ensure that the clinical trial is being performed in an ethical fashion. The role of biostatisticians cannot be underestimated. The way the biostatisticians on the committee function is to ensure that the data that we review is correct as it comes from the sponsor's statistical team. And we'll come back to that at a point later in time. Sometimes there's a community representative, and the leadership must guarantee diversity of the committee. Old, young, Asians, Americans, African Americans, we need to have a diverse committee. And then there's an executive secretary who is responsible for the minutes and keeping all the records. Well, what are the specific responsibilities of the chair before the meeting? If a DSMB is reviewing multiple protocols, and the example I would use is the NIH COVID studies, there needs to be an assignment of a clinician and a biostatistician who serve as discussants and are responsible for presentations in both open and closed sessions. Now, that does not preclude the responsibility of other committee members. They must review the study and they must know the study in detail. The chair has to know the study inside and out and needs to understand the anticipated toxicity and endpoints, particularly do they make sense in the changing evolution of disease. Finally, the chair must understand the shortcomings of the clinical trial and help guide emendations if possible. And this is no small task. It requires a lot of time and attention to detail. Managing the meeting is another challenge. The meeting should function as a well-oiled machine, and it reminds me of Sir Aldous Huxley's commencement address at Columbia University in 1905, when he talked about the learning of individuals as being a well-oiled machine. Just as this Data Safety and Monitoring Board, or all of them, should function as a well-oiled machine. The meeting has to ensure open discussion. Each person on the committee must be called on to elicit their opinions and observations in all of the sessions, open and closed. And that's exceedingly important because some members of these committees are shy and they are afraid to express their opinion. So putting them in a position where they need to express their opinion is exceedingly important. Okay, what about meeting considerations? What does the committee really need to pay attention to? Well, first of all, we pay attention to accrual. And we make sure that accrual is meeting what we would accept as the standards established by the sponsor. Sometimes that's a problem. Look at what happened with COVID-19. Now forget the vaccine trials, but look at cancer trials or look at therapeutic interventions for other diseases. Patients simply could not get to a study site to participate in a clinical trial. Site performance is crucial. In large part, for many clinical trials, CROs are the ones who assess site performance and report back to both the sponsor as well as the DSMB on site performance. If site performance is not up to par, then interventions need to be taken. We need to count for geographic variability. Let me give you an example. We've seen variants of SARS-CoV-2 arise in South Africa, Brazil, and India. And we need to know whether or not the vaccines that are being studied in those areas of the world meet acceptable standards for EUAs or EMA authorizations. There has to be gender and racial balance in all the clinical trials. For example, with COVID-19, there needed to be a stress on underrepresented minorities, always a challenge, and also the elderly who are particularly high risk for severe consequences of disease. The Data Safety and Monitoring Board has to monitor data integrity. And what I mean by that is all potential cases that would be considered in the database need to be adjudicated in a prompt fashion. So the Data Safety and Monitoring Board is looking at timely data as illustrated by the next data point, and that is data that is contemporary and not 2 to 3 months out of time. Factors which influence performance of a clinical trial include unacceptable toxicity, early evidence of efficacy, futility assessment, and then there clearly may be changes in the temporal management of disease, which make the study that is being assessed by the Data Safety and Monitoring Board out of date. and that has to be considered in each trial. So what do we do about forging recommendations? In my opinion, minutes take two versions for many trials, one which is for the public domain and one which is for the confidential reader and for files, namely with NIAID-sponsored studies, the federal government. Importantly, data safety and monitoring boards must assume that all minutes will appear in the public domain. And the examples I would use is the AstraZeneca interim analysis, which appeared in the New York Times and Washington Post. While that may be confidential, in the world that we live in, data safety and monitoring boards must be absolutely transparent in the recommendations that they make. And there, that was a particular challenge, but needed to be in the public domain. Okay, ongoing responsibilities. We need to continuously monitor adverse events, should they occur, and in particular deaths, and even deaths and severe events that occur between data safety and monitoring board meetings. In monitoring multiple studies with similar designs, we need to learn about common unique adverse events. And an example I'd use are individuals who have idiopathic thrombocytopenic purpura who develop cavernous sinus thromboses. That's just but one example. Paresthesia is another example. Facial paralysis is a third example. And there may be similarities across the studies that should be brought to the attention of the sponsor that they would then need to report to the FDA. And I want to emphasize that the DSMB reports through the government to the sponsor so that they can make the FDA aware of these adverse events. There's got to be communication at all levels. The minutes must be agreed upon by all members of the DSMB, and obviously they require multiple iterations. Final versions of the minutes must be signed off on by the chair, and the recommendations must be communicated to the leadership team, whether it be government officials or representatives of industry. The Data Safety and Monitoring Board must refrain from voicing opinions to the public. As I say, Data Safety and Monitoring Board should live in a closet. Transparency comes with assuredness that the final analysis is correct. And that's what the individuals who are going to both participate in the studies and be the benefactor of the outcome of the studies need to know. The data must be honest and with integrity. So my concluding thoughts are, every data safety and monitoring board is different. Do not assume that each data safety and monitoring board will function in the same way. The chair must know the strengths and weaknesses, as well as the shortcomings of colleagues on the data safety and monitoring board, and make those strengths and shortcomings an advantage for the committee. I think this is a wonderful opportunity for everyone to learn about data safety and monitoring boards, and I'd be happy to help anyone in the future. My email address is simply rwhitley@uab.edu. Thank you very much.